The day my attorney looked across her desk and asked why I was paying my husband to live in my own apartment, I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe if you love romance revenge stories. My name is Quinn Mercer, and until that afternoon, I believed I had built a life no one could take from me. I owned a beautiful apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side, inherited from my grandmother years before I ever met my husband, Rafferty Hale. It wasn't the most expensive property in the neighborhood, but every inch of it carried her memory. When she handed me the deed on my 26th birthday, she tucked a handwritten note inside. Keep it, no matter what. I framed the note. The deed went into a fireproof safe. Then Rafferty walked into my life. Everyone admired him. He remembered names, opened doors, volunteered at charity events, and somehow made complete strangers feel important. When I first showed him the apartment, he ran his fingers across the old oak windowsill and smiled. "Your grandmother didn't leave you real estate," he said. "She left you freedom." I thought I had found someone who understood me. We married 18 months later. For 2 years, life was wonderfully ordinary. We hosted friends, argued over paint colors, laughed at our retired racing greyhounds stealing the couch, and built routines that felt permanent. Then my career exploded. I was constantly traveling for work, barely spending a week in New York each month. One evening, Rafferty suggested taking over all the apartment paperwork. "I'll deal with the taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything," he said. "You shouldn't have to worry about any of it." It sounded practical, and because I trusted my husband completely, I signed the limited power of attorney he placed in front of me without reading every page. For almost 2 years, nothing seemed wrong. Until one rainy Tuesday night. Rafferty came home carrying a leather folder and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver terrible news. He spread invoices across the kitchen counter, sighed deeply, and looked me straight in the eyes. "If we want to keep your grandmother's apartment," he said quietly, "you're going to have to start paying for it." I looked at the framed note hanging in the hallway. "Keep it, no matter what." Without asking another question, I nodded. That single decision would cost me far more than money. The first payment left my account on a cold Monday morning in November. I stared at the confirmation email for longer than I should have before closing my laptop and heading to work. I told myself it was temporary. Once the taxes stabilized and the insurance premiums came down, life would go back to normal. It never did. By the second month, I canceled a weekend trip to Napa Valley with friends. By the 6th, I was packing lunches instead of eating out and taking the subway instead of taxis. Every time I questioned whether the sacrifices were worth it, my eyes drifted to the framed note in the hallway. "Keep it, no matter what." Rafferty never pressured me for the money. He didn't have to. He would casually mention another increase in building costs over breakfast or sigh while closing a spreadsheet on his laptop before I walked into the room. "I hate seeing you work so hard," he would say. Then he'd kiss my forehead. Somehow, that always made me feel guilty instead of suspicious. My younger brother, Lucas, noticed the changes before anyone else. "You've skipped 3 family trips in a row," he said one afternoon. "Since when are you worried about money?" I repeated the explanation Rafferty had given me so many times that it sounded rehearsed. "The apartment's getting expensive to maintain." Lucas frowned but let it go. Christmas arrived with Manhattan wrapped in lights and fresh snow. Rafferty handed me a small velvet box after dinner. Inside was a pair of diamond earrings. "They're beautiful," I whispered. He smiled. "You deserve something nice." I threw my arms around him and cried. I had no idea the money for those earrings had come from the same account I was slowly draining to save my grandmother's apartment. 3 weeks later, while dropping off one of his suits at the dry cleaner, I reached into the pocket to check for receipts. Instead, I found a hotel key card. The hotel was in Boston. Rafferty had told me he'd spent that weekend in Chicago. For the first time since we married, a thought entered my mind that I couldn't shake. What else had my husband lied about? I kept the hotel key card in my desk drawer for 4 days. Every morning I opened the drawer, looked at it, and closed it again. There had to be an explanation. Rafferty wasn't careless. He planned everything, remembered everything, and never left loose ends behind. Surely there was a reason a hotel in Boston had issued him a room key on the same weekend he'd been in Chicago. I almost confronted him once. The Boston hotel keycard was in my pocket as I walked upstairs and stopped outside our bedroom. The bathroom door was open. Rafferty stood at the sink, shaving, humming softly to himself as if our life were perfectly ordinary. All I had to do was walk in and ask why he had spent a weekend in Boston after telling me he was in Chicago. My hand closed around the keycard so tightly that the plastic edge dug into my palm. I even took one step forward. Then he caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. "You're home early," he said. For one reckless second, I almost pulled the card from my pocket. Instead, I smiled back. "I just missed you." He kissed my forehead on his way downstairs, and I stood alone in the bathroom listening to his footsteps disappear. Only then did I realize something that frightened me even more than the hotel key. If Rafferty was lying, he had been practicing for years. I couldn't stop thinking about the lie. If Rafferty had lied about Boston, what else had he lied about? As I stood in the dark kitchen, Lucas's voice drifted back to me. "Since when are you worried about money? Grandma paid that apartment off before she died." At the time, I had brushed the comment aside without a second thought. Now I couldn't. For the first time, I wondered if Lucas hadn't been questioning my finances at all. Maybe he'd been questioning Rafferty's story. I walked into the study, unlocked the filing cabinet, and searched for the folder containing the apartment paperwork. Most of it was exactly where I expected it to be, but the limited power of attorney wasn't. That bothered me. Rafferty had always insisted on keeping the original in his office because he was the one handling the paperwork. For the first time, I realized I couldn't remember reading a single page before signing it. The next morning, I called his assistant and casually asked for a scanned copy, pretending I needed it for an insurance form. She emailed it within 20 minutes. I opened the document, stared at the legal language for nearly an hour, and understood almost none of it. There was only one person I trusted to explain it. Her name was Claire Donnelly. She had handled my grandmother's estate for more than 20 years. She was meticulous, impossible to intimidate, and one of the few people my grandmother had trusted completely. "I need you to look at something," I told her. The next afternoon, I sat across from her in a quiet conference room overlooking Midtown Manhattan while she reviewed the limited power of attorney I had signed. She read every page once. Then she started over. Finally, she looked up. "This is a fairly standard limited power of attorney," she said. I let out a small breath of relief. "So there's nothing unusual about it?" "The document itself?" Claire shook her head. "No." I hesitated. "I've been transferring money to Rafferty every month because he told me the apartment's taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs had become too much to manage." For the first time since I'd walked into her office, Claire's expression changed. "You've been doing what?" She folded her hands on the table. "This document authorizes him to communicate with insurers, contractors, and government agencies. It allows him to sign administrative paperwork on your behalf." She paused. "It does not authorize him to collect money from you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint hum of traffic 12 floors below. "There must be another agreement," I whispered. Claire slowly shook her head. "If there is, it isn't here." She immediately ordered the apartment's financial records, tax history, insurance filings, and payment ledger. Then she looked directly at me. "Until we know what's happening, don't confront him." I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. As I walked out of the building, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Rafferty. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I don't say it enough, but thank you for trusting me. Love you." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. For years, those words would have made me smile. This time they made my stomach turn. Because for the first time since our wedding day, I wasn't afraid that my husband was lying to me. I was afraid he had become so good at it that I no longer knew which parts of our life had ever been real. Claire called me on a Thursday morning. "I have the records," she said. "You should come in." Her voice was calm, but something about it made me leave work immediately. When I arrived at her office, a thick file was waiting on the conference table. She pushed it toward me. "Take your time." The first page listed the apartment's property taxes for the past 5 years. I read it twice, then a third time. The numbers barely moved. The insurance premiums had risen so little, they were almost insignificant. The building's maintenance fees had increased once by a modest amount that any homeowner could have absorbed without changing their lifestyle. Nothing, absolutely nothing, resembled the financial catastrophe Rafferty had described. I looked up. "So where did all my money go?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she slid over a legal pad and quietly said, "That's the question you need to answer before you confront him." The train ride home felt strangely peaceful. I wasn't confused anymore. Confusion had been replaced by certainty. Rafferty had lied. The only mystery left was how much. That night I waited until he fell asleep. His breathing settled into its familiar rhythm, while Ellis snored softly at the foot of the bed. I carried my laptop into the study, made coffee, and opened 3 years of bank statements. Old habits returned. Before corporate strategy, before board presentations, before marriage, I had always solved problems with spreadsheets. By midnight, every transfer to Rafferty sat in one column. The dates of his credit card payments sat in another. By 1 in the morning, patterns emerged. Within 48 hours of nearly every transfer I made, his cards were paid off. Luxury hotels, private airport lounges, designer stores, fine dining restaurants I had never visited. Then I found the charge that stopped me cold. The hotel in Boston, 4 nights. A suite, 2 guests. My hands hovered above the keyboard, but I didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, I opened a blank document. I typed a single word, Rafferty. Then I began listing every lie I could prove. When the sun rose over Manhattan, I closed my laptop and looked through the window at a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The woman who believed every word Rafferty told her was gone. In her place stood someone who trusted evidence instead of promises. For the first time since Rafferty Hale walked into my life, I was no longer the only one who didn't know what was coming. I didn't hire a private investigator. I became one. For 17 days, I lived 2 separate lives. By day, I smiled through meetings, kissed Rafferty goodbye, and answered his messages with heart emojis. By night, I sat alone in the study with a laptop, 3 years of bank records, and enough coffee to keep an entire newsroom awake. The truth was hiding in the details. Claire helped me obtain every document she legally could. Lucas quietly searched public records and social media. Neither of them pushed me. Neither of them needed to. Every hour uncovered another lie. The first breakthrough came through social media. After cross-checking locations, dates, and tagged attendees from the weekends Rafferty claimed to be meeting investors in Chicago, one profile kept appearing over and over in Boston. The account belonged to a luxury real estate consultant named Vanessa Brooks. She never posted Rafferty's face online, but she posted fragments. A rooftop dinner in Boston. A luxury hotel bathrobe. A man's wrist wearing the same limited edition watch I had bought my husband on our 2nd anniversary. The dates matched the weekends he claimed to be meeting investors in Chicago. I felt sick. But I kept digging. Then Claire called, "You need to see this." By 9 o'clock the following morning, I was in her office. She waited until I sat down before reaching into a file on her desk and handing me a copy of the apartment's recorded deed that she had pulled from the county title records. It wasn't a sales contract. It was worse. 6 months earlier, Rafferty had quietly met with a luxury real estate brokerage to discuss the market value of my apartment. The notes from the meeting included one sentence highlighted in yellow. Client anticipates acquiring full ownership through upcoming marital settlement. I read it again, then again. My hands started shaking. He wasn't just lying to me. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was planning for the day he could take my grandmother's apartment and start a new life inside it. That night, after Rafferty fell asleep, I opened his laptop. He had forgotten to log out of his email. Remembering the name from the social media profile I'd been tracking for days, I typed a single word into the search bar. Vanessa. Hundreds of messages appeared. Most of them were harmless, until I found the draft he had never sent. As soon as the divorce is finished, we'll renovate the place together. You'll love the windows. It finally feels like our future. Our future? He was talking about my home. The apartment my grandmother had placed into my hands with a blue linen cloth and a promise to protect it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I cried so hard I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from waking him. Not because he loved someone else, but because he had invited her into the one place my grandmother had begged me never to lose. When the tears stopped, I printed every email, every brokerage note, and every financial record. I placed them into a single folder. Then I wrote one sentence across the front in black marker. He thinks this apartment is his ending. He has no idea it's about to become mine again. I never confronted Rafferty. Not once. I still made his coffee every morning. I still reminded him to take his vitamins. I even bought him a leather notebook for his birthday and wrote, "To many more successful years together." He kissed me and called me the best wife in the world. I almost laughed. The folder hidden in my office drawer had grown too thick to close. Bank statements, brokerage records, email drafts, social media screenshots. Every page carried a date. Every date carried a lie. 3 weeks before our anniversary, Rafferty announced he had planned a dinner. "The whole family will be there," he said with a grin. "My parents, your mom, Lucas, our closest friends. I wanted everyone together to celebrate us." Celebrate us. The irony was almost beautiful. I smiled and reached across the table for his hand. "I can't wait." The days leading up to the dinner passed quietly. Claire prepared certified copies of every document. Lucas encrypted digital backups and stored them in 3 separate locations. Neither of them asked whether I was nervous. They already knew the answer. I wasn't. I was finished being afraid. The private room at the Langford overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting thousands of lights across the city. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Rafferty looked completely at ease. Halfway through dessert, he stood and lifted his champagne glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began, "and most of all, I want to thank Quinn. She has trusted me with everything, and every decision I've ever made has been for our future." Applause filled the room. My mother smiled. His father nodded proudly. Even Lucas looked at me without expression. I clapped too. Then I stood. "I actually brought you a gift." The room fell silent. Claire walked in carrying a navy blue portfolio and placed it gently in front of me before leaving without a word. I untied the faded blue linen wrapped around the final document inside. The same blue linen my grandmother had used the day she placed the deed into my hands. I laid it carefully on the table. Then I looked directly at my husband. "Rafferty," I said, my voice calm enough to make the silence feel louder, "would you mind explaining why you've spent the last 3 years charging your wife to live in an apartment that has always belonged to her?" His eyes widened for only a fraction of a second. before years of practiced charm returned. He let out a quiet laugh and looked around the table as if I had just made an embarrassing mistake. "Quinn," he said gently, "I think you've misunderstood what those payments were." He turned toward my mother first. She insisted on contributing to our household expenses because she hated feeling dependent on me. I told her it wasn't necessary, but she wanted us to be equal partners. Then he looked back at me with a sad smile that would have convinced almost anyone who didn't know him. "I never charged you rent. You chose to transfer that money." For a brief moment, doubt flickered across a few faces at the table. I reached into the portfolio and removed one final sheet of paper. "I thought you might say that." I slid it across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of him. It was a printed email from 3 years earlier. Subject: monthly payment instructions. Beneath it, in Rafferty's own words, was a sentence no one in the room could misunderstand. "Please use apartment holding costs as the reference for every transfer, so my bookkeeping stays organized." I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I could have added. Only then did Rafferty's fingers tighten around the stem of his champagne glass. The color drained from his face. As he tried to lift it, the crystal cracked in his hand. I slid the deed across the table. Then the certified financial records. Then the brokerage notes describing his plan to acquire the apartment through our divorce. Finally, I placed the printed email in front of him. "As soon as the divorce is finished, we'll renovate the place together. You'll love the windows. It finally feels like our future." No one reached for dessert. No one reached for a drink. The only sound in the room was the soft crack of Rafferty's champagne glass as it shattered in his hand. No one spoke. Not my mother. Not Lucas. Not Rafferty's parents. The pianist in the corner stopped playing halfway through a song, sensing that something in the room had shifted beyond repair. Rafferty looked down at the blood running from his palm where the broken champagne glass had cut him. Then he laughed. A short, nervous laugh. "This isn't funny, Quinn." "I agree." He reached for the deed. I moved it away before his fingers touched the paper. "It's certified," I said calmly. "Everyone at this table is welcome to read it." Claire stepped back into the room and quietly handed copies to each guest. My mother unfolded hers first. Lucas already knew what it contained. Rafferty's father adjusted his glasses and read in complete silence. Across the table, Rafferty's mother covered her mouth. The apartment had always belonged to me. Always. Rafferty straightened his jacket and found his voice again. For the first time since I had known him, Rafferty wasn't thinking about how to win. He was trying to calculate how much everyone else already knew. Then his phone vibrated. The screen lit up against the polished table before he could reach for it. Vanessa Brooks. A preview of the message appeared beneath her name. "Did you tell her tonight? I can't keep pretending forever." No one at the table spoke. My mother read it first, then Rafferty's father. Even the waiter standing near the wine cart froze for half a second before quietly looking away. Rafferty grabbed the phone and turned it face down, but he was too late. Everyone had already seen it. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my folder and slid the printed email about renovating my apartment beside his plate. Suddenly, the text message wasn't an accusation. It was confirmation. Instead, I placed one final page in the center of the table. It was the brokerage note. The sentence highlighted in yellow caught everyone's attention. Client anticipates acquiring full ownership through upcoming marital settlement. My mother looked at him. "You were planning to take her apartment?" He didn't answer. His own father stood slowly from his chair. "I taught you better than this." Then he walked out. A moment later, his mother followed. Lucas closed the folder in front of him and looked directly at Rafferty. "You didn't marry my sister." He paused. "You married her address." The words hung in the room like smoke. Rafferty finally looked at me. Not with anger, not even with embarrassment. With realization, he understood that every version of the story he had prepared had already been destroyed. The evidence was too complete. The lies were too carefully documented. And for the first time since we'd met, Rafferty wasn't controlling the story anymore. I was. I picked up the blue linen cloth, folded it around my grandmother's deed, and slipped it back into my bag. Then I looked him in the eyes one last time. This was never about money. It was about trust. And you spent mine like it belonged to you. Without another word, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Rafferty alone at the head of a table where no one was sitting beside him anymore. As I reached the lobby, I glanced back through the glass doors. Rafferty was still sitting alone at the head of the table. The broken champagne glass remained beside his plate, and blood had soaked into the white napkin wrapped around his hand. For the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't trying to charm anyone. He was just staring at the deed I had left behind. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning in March. It lasted 23 minutes. Rafferty's attorneys argued that every transfer I made had been voluntary. They called them marital contributions, shared expenses, ordinary financial decisions between husband and wife. For one brief moment, listening from across the courtroom, I wondered whether the years of lies might actually be enough to save him. Then Claire stood. She walked to the bench carrying a binder thicker than a telephone book and calmly introduced every piece of evidence we had spent months collecting. The fabricated spreadsheets, the certified tax records, the brokerage notes, the draft email to Vanessa, the hotel invoices, the bank transfers labeled apartment holding costs. One by one, Rafferty's explanations disappeared. By the time the hearing ended, there was nothing left to explain. The judge ordered him to repay every dollar he had fraudulently obtained from me, together with interest and legal fees. The apartment remained in my sole ownership. It always had. Outside the courthouse, Rafferty caught up with me on the steps. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like an ordinary man instead of someone who controlled every room he entered. "I loved you," he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "No. You loved being trusted." I walked away before he could answer. 3 weeks later, the movers carried the last box out of my apartment. I waited until the elevator doors closed. Then I locked the front door. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt safe. Ellis wandered into the living room, circled twice, and settled onto the rug beneath the window, where afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor. I opened the fireproof safe. Inside was the blue linen cloth my grandmother had wrapped around the deed all those years ago. It still carried the faintest trace of lavender. Folded inside was the handwritten note I had read 1,000 times. "Keep it, no matter what." I smiled through unexpected tears. For years, I believed she had been talking about the apartment. She hadn't. She had been talking about the woman holding the note. I folded the paper carefully, wrapped it around the deed again, and returned both to the safe before locking it one final time. Then I crossed the room and slipped the keys into my pocket. Rafferty had spent 3 years trying to convince me that my security depended on him. In the end, the only thing he ever truly owned was the lie. The apartment was never the inheritance my grandmother wanted to protect. I was. And while Rafferty walked away with nothing but his excuses and a suitcase full of tailored clothes, I walked away with the keys. If you were Quinn, what would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable revenge stories.